Welcome to Chapter by Chapter. I am your host, Brian Thomas Kropp, and I believe that stories have a tremendous power for good, and so I write them, and I enjoy sharing them with you. If you are new to the podcast, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad that you are here, and the way the show rolls is in just a moment, you'll hear another chapter. I guess if this is your first time here, this is the very first chapter you're ever going to hear. We'll hear a chapter from a story that I wrote, and then on the other side of that, we'll go into some of the details that went into writing of the chapter, whether that's Easter eggs from my past that went into that chapter, or how a book gets written, or at least how I write a book, or any kind of behind-the-scenes kind of information. That's what goes on towards the end of our time together. We have been in a crime noir detective story called Shell Game, and it is involving this detective in a small Kansas town. His name is Evan Gold, and he has a lot of things that he's juggling. He has a failing business. He has a failing marriage. His partner was murdered a couple of nights ago, along with another guy that Evan has never met named Jason Charles. He has a client named Claire Porter who is less than truthful, and there's this other dude named Harold Huber who is trying to find this mysterious pearl. Now, unknown to Harold, Evan already has the pearl, but because Evan knows that Harold is up to no good, Evan is going to hold on to that pearl. Thank you very much. But in this chapter, Evan and Claire are hoping to meet up with Harold because Evan suspects that Claire and Harold are actually playing on the same team, and he needs to get all the liars in the same room and figure out all that's going on in solving the crimes that are out there. And so he's hoping to meet up with them. But on the way from Claire's apartment to Evan's apartment, they run into a very important person, and that is what this chapter is about. So you can go back to past episodes and catch up, or you can hop in with Chapter 18 of Shell Game right after we hear from this week's sponsors. Chapter 18. The fog was an opaque white wall, much thicker than when Evan first ventured out earlier that evening. Cones of luminance spread out from the street lamps, providing the only direction in the night. The haze erased the stars and moon, making the night skies seem like a ghostly ceiling pressing in on them. The lonely sounds of their shoes on the sidewalks made it seem like Evan and Claire were the only people left on Earth. Evan turned Claire up Constitution and then over to Commercial. They walked past the Granada. Harold's play was still going on. Evan checked his watch. Not much else would be open at that hour, and even if there had been, he knew he needed to keep on the move until he could control the environment. Lauren Bacall might make her presence known at any time, and sooner or later, Evan suspected, she would become downright annoying. So he invited Claire over to his apartment to wait for Harold. Evan said they could call on Harold at his hotel once the play let out. She agreed, and the couple headed east on 10th and then south on Exchange. They turned the corner of Exchange toward First, and Evan could just make out the blinking red of the neon sign that hung from his building. Across the street, a car, outlined by a nearby street lamp, sat waiting. It was pale yellow and sat like a moored ghost ship in the vapor. He recognized the shape, which made his heart leap and his gut churn all at the same instant. To not rouse any adverse reactions in Claire, Evan acknowledged the shot of adrenaline coursing through his bloodstream and successfully worked to keep his breathing and footsteps even. Claire was doing a fair amount of talking, which also provided a cover if his poker face had given anything away. If Claire had noticed the car, Evan couldn't sense she'd given it any particular importance. As the pair drew closer and closer to the apartment building, the car's identity became more precise, only confirming Evan's initial reaction. Its tall, boxy cab, the white-walled spare tire attached to the trunk, the dented back fender. Evan noticed the rolled-down driver's window and braced himself for the conversation he knew was coming. He calculated that he was already spotted, so doubling back and going in through the rear entrance would only raise suspicions. Though, if he was wrong, he might sneak into his place unseen. Evan pulled the brim of his hat down on his right side and guided Claire up to the front door. Before he could slip in, he heard a voice sing out from out of the misty dark. "Evan! Evan!" Claire craned her neck to see who was making such a racket in the middle of the night. "It seems you have an admirer," Claire said. "Evan, I'm glad I caught you." Again, it was Catherine. This was going to be tough to explain. After all, this was the part of the job that provided the most fuel to their problems. "Evan!" Her voice cut through the night air. Evan sighed. "Wait here," Evan said to Claire. "I'll take care of it." "You don't want to introduce me?" Claire said with mischief in her smile. "Wait here," Evan repeated and squeezed Claire's arm. He walked across the street. The pick-pock of his heels bounced off unseen houses and structures. "Why, look who it is! Evan Gold, Private Eye," Catherine said. She wore a royal and navy gingham dress. Evan loved that dress on her. He rested his hands on the door through the open window. "What brings you out here, Catherine?" Evan started. "Who's the girl?" Catherine said with an "I dare you" smile. "You didn't answer my question, Catherine," said Evan. "She's pretty." Catherine pointed a quick finger in Claire's direction. "Is she here a lot, or—" Evan twisted his waist to look over at Claire, who was waiting patiently in the light of the apartment's entryway. "I told you. I had one last case that I needed to wrap up. I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm working right now," Evan said. "She's pretty," Catherine said, looking around Evan's arm at Claire. "Did you happen to make it to the bank today?" Evan felt the punch right in his gut and hung his head. "Well, I can see why," Catherine jabbed. "You clearly have more important things to worry yourself with." Then she locked her eyes on Evan's face. "How can I even trust you if this is the kind of life you choose to lead?" Evan sighed. "Catherine, it's late. You should be at home. Why don't you go home?" Something caught Evan's attention at the edge of his vision. He adjusted his stance and shifted his eyes to the right. There she was. She'd found him, Lauren Bacall. She may not be the best stalker, but she was persistent. Evan sucked his teeth. She leaned up against a lamppost, her hands jammed in her pockets. Her blonde hair and khaki coat stood out as clear as day. It was so brazen. Evan didn't know if he should be nervous or impressed. "You're right. I should be at home. I was at home, and I thought that I wanted to see you. You know, why wait the full week before we work on us? And then, you'll find this funny, I remembered I didn't know where you lived now, but I remembered you're a creature of habit. So I thought of where you were living when we met. So here I am. I rang, but obviously you were out." She was landing blow after blow, and he knew he just had to take it. Evan didn't like getting sucker punched, but her words landed like a blow in his gut all the same. He couldn't tell her what was going on, what he was doing with Claire. He couldn't bring her into the situation when not all the risks were known. He couldn't open her up to the danger. Evan slid his right hand in his pocket and started to fiddle with the pearl, trying to think his way out of the situation. The pearl warmed up and showed him another badly cut movie in his mind. This one had visions of Claire, Catherine, and Evan all together in his apartment. A man approached the building from the outside. There was a smashed vase, a cut cheek, and Catherine leaving in tears while throwing her wedding ring at Evan. He didn't know what any of that meant. Was that what would happen, might happen, or would never happen because he was crazy and believing wild thoughts from a talking pearl? Still, he was convinced of one thing, regardless of the consequences. "You should go," Evan told Catherine, and slid his eyes over to Lauren Bacall. "This case is not on the level, and I can't have you getting hurt." "I don't know about that," Catherine said. "I mean, about the hurt part. I believe you that this case isn't on the level, but you're an expert in hurt." "I can explain everything in the morning, but not right now. I'm busy," Evan said. "Here's another thought, Evan. Why not just walk away now? You know, you always say truth and justice will make themselves known. Just walk away. Let some other gumshoe, or better yet, the police, pick up the pieces and see that law and order are preserved." She put her hand on Evan's. "Come home with me." Evan looked hard into the eyes of his wife, the woman he'd promised so many things. He knew that she could find a better man, but more than that, he wanted to take up her offer. Just get in the car and leave it all behind. But he also knew that if he didn't put this to bed, if he didn't see to it personally, truth and justice might be served, but something from this mess would come back to bite him later. Bite him and maybe bite Catherine too. I can't, he said eventually. Catherine withdrew her hand. You have to ride in on the white steed? Catherine asked. Something like that, Evan said. But not for me. I know it doesn't look like it, but this is for you, Evan said. Well, you're right, Catherine said. It doesn't look like it. It looks like you're choosing your work, or whatever she is, over me. Kathy, Evan said, you know, I don't think a week is long enough. I'm starting to think there may never be time enough, Evan. I don't like being pushed off. I came down here, against my better judgment, thinking... I don't know what I was thinking. She looked up into Evan's eyes. I thought you loved me. Evan took a deep breath and let it out between his teeth. Kathy, I do love you, but there's a killer on the loose, and you have to bring him in. Kathy, listen, I'm on the clock. There's a phone call I need to make. I want to come up with you, Catherine said. Evan's blood ran cold. The pearl's vision snapped back into his mind. No, Evan blurted. I want to come up and talk, she said. We're talking right here. Evan crossed his arms. Let me into whatever goes on in that brain of yours. Please go home, Catherine, Evan said. This is no good. I'll get to the bank tomorrow. This isn't good. You need to go home. Catherine pointed her sad green eyes at Evan and then over to Claire, then back to Evan. Eventually, Catherine said, You're not up to anything funny? I promise, Evan said. This case is not on the level, but you are? Catherine, you'll call me then, asked Catherine. Later? When the week is out, Evan said. It's so good to know Athens has its very own Superman, Catherine said. A few more seconds passed before Catherine leaned back in her seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. You promised, Catherine said to Evan just before putting the car into gear and moving into the misty night. As Evan turned across back over the street, he eyed the trench-coated woman still leaning against the lamp-post. Evan sucked his teeth again and scraped his left foot on the asphalt, then trotted back to Claire. Another client? Claire asked when Evan made it back. Let's get you inside, Evan said. She seems nice, said Claire. I don't want to talk about it. Evan fished in his pocket for his keys. You all right? Claire asked, touching Evan's arm. Just something in the air. Evan pulled out his key, turned the lock, and opened the building's door. A moment later, he and Claire were safely inside. So last week, we had a long conversation about dramatic action and just the conversation and how we're trying to move the story forward between Evan and Claire. And now we have to get our other liar kind of into the mix, which is Harold. So how do we get a hold of Harold, who, again, clearly is up to no good? So we're going to go back to the apartment. Actually, we're going to try to go by the theater and the hotel and all those things, and Harold is not yet available, so what do we do? And I thought that this was a good time to drop in a reminder that there's this other storyline of Evan's marriage that is falling apart. He's burning days of this relationship, and what the deal was early in the book was that he essentially had a week to shut down this detective business, and if he could do that, set the whole thing down, he'd be able to go with his wife Catherine and possibly have the chance of building a happy life together, because right now it's not going so well. But he's got to finish this one last case. And one of the things that I enjoy about this chapter are there's a couple of things. One is I realized this only really recently. I didn't write this intentionally, but he has several women in his life, and they're all playing different roles in his life, and they're all doing different things, and they're all at a different level of danger. So he's got Claire Porter, who's the client, who is not telling the truth, and he's got her waiting at the door, right? That's how part of this chapter goes. And how do I keep her not knowing that this woman is now my wife in the car, because I don't want them meeting because I want to protect my wife. But my wife is sticking her nose into a possibly dangerous business. She loves me, and so she's trying to just to get to know me or try to help out with the relationship or whatever all the motivations are. And the fact that now the wife is seeing Evan with another woman, that raises questions. It's going to stress out Evan, even though everything is on the up and up. It just doesn't look right? So we got that. We've got the Lauren Bacall lady who's hanging off in the distance, who's just acting as creepily threatening as possible. And then you've got the Pearl, which has a feminine voice. So you've got all four of these people or entities, I guess if you include the Pearl in there, just all kind of crowding around him all at once. And every one of them is asking something different and weighty for Evan. So I kind of like putting him in that crock pot. I didn't quite realize that it was all of the women of this story, or all except for Sophie. Sophie's not there, but all the rest of them are all present in this one scene. And just kind of the stress that would be in. I don't know. I'm a parent of 4 kids, and every once in a while, all 4 kids want my attention at the exact same time. And there's a whole lot of daddy, 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 daddy. Look at this, all this kind of stuff. And there's a level of stress of wanting to please everybody and get to everybody, and knowing that you are disappointing at least 3 other people at any given time, which is lousy when you're in that position. But as far as like an audience member watching someone go through misery, for some reason we find this entertaining, and that's included in a lot of the stories that we read and watch and enjoy. So I just realized that was what was sort of going on in this chapter. The other kind of large thing, the role, I guess, that Catherine is playing in this. If you have not seen a string of videos that are on YouTube by a very funny group of movie watchers called How It Should Have Ended, they look at a movie and they say, what was the simplest way for this story to end? And did the filmmakers own up to that simplicity, or do they make it harder? So, for example, my favorite one is of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. It might have just been Fellowship of the Ring, I don't know. But they're all at the Fellowship gathering, and they're trying to decide who should take the ring to Mount Doom and drop it in Mount Doom. And Gandalf gets the eagles, and they all ride on the eagle to Mount Doom and just drop it in. And essentially the movie's over in a half hour. And someone makes a comment, boy, that was sure easy. Thanks for calling these eagles, Gandalf. Could you imagine if we walked this whole way? Ha ha ha. Because why didn't Gandalf just do that from the beginning? And so those are questions that people have after they watch the movie. Like, how come it was more complicated? Why couldn't it have been simpler? And so one of the roles that Catherine is playing in this chapter is asking those questions. If Evan is so determined to save his marriage, why doesn't he just shut the business down now? Why does he have to solve this particular crime? Why doesn't he just walk away? That is a fair question to ask, and I think it's a fair question for the audience to ask. Otherwise, it seems like he really doesn't want the marriage to continue if he doesn't have a good answer for that. And for him to have the answer, well, I know that if I don't solve this, the police are already on to me. I didn't do it, but the police think that I did, and so if I shut this whole thing down and run away, the police are going to be after me, and that's no good. So I do need to see this to the end. Plus, and we'll learn more about this in future chapters, but there's a sense of honor in Evan, and there were some unjustified actions done to his partner. And so he is sort of bound by honor to solve that and to figure that out. And so he can't, by honor and by knowing how things are going to play out, he can't just walk away. He has to see this thing to the end if he can, and hopefully he will be able to walk away from this, and he and Catherine can have a decent relationship. But I think at this point in the story, you might be asking that very same question, like, why don't you just get some eagles and drop the ring into the volcano? That would be a lot simpler. So that is one of the roles that Catherine plays, in addition to just adding more pressure, increasing that pressure on Evan. Other things that are mildly entertaining for me. I was talking with my daughter just this morning. She's turning into somewhat of a songwriter, and she was telling me about this song that I wrote. She was telling me all the references that she had, like other musical influences that she had, and she can hear that when she's singing a particular song that she wrote. I said, yeah, that is kind of the thing. Like I will listen to stuff that I wrote, and I can't really hear it the way, say, you hear the song or hear the chapter on this podcast, because I'm hearing all of the references in my head. I'm not really hearing what I wrote. And so one of those happens to be when Evan is telling Catherine that she needs to go home. Well, one of the plays that I read in college that got me into writing was a play called Glengarry Glen Ross. Now, as a pastor, I cannot officially recommend this play. It has many, many, many R-rated words in it. But again, David Mamet, I don't think the man knows Jesus. Pray that he does at some point. But he does write with a particular rhythm and a particular there's a way that he writes that I enjoy. And there's a movie version of Glengarry Glen Ross that has Al Pacino and Ed Harris, and it's just a killer, absolutely killer cast. And for someone, if you look at the script of Glengarry Glen Ross, you're like, I don't know how to read this. As a friend of mine in college said, it gives me a headache. It does. There's no way to make heads or tails of it. But then you watch the movie and you see the script done the way the script was intended to be done. You're like, oh, now it makes complete sense and I see it all. But there's a particular character who is convincing another character to get out of the office and just get away and get a breather. And so it's in the play, for those people who know the play, it's sort of a famous bit where this one character just repeats essentially the phrase, go to lunch, over and over and over again, with different slight variations like, go to lunch, will you go to lunch, go to lunch, will you go to lunch, like it's all this. Anyway, that's what I kept hearing was like, will you go home? Just, anyway. He wrote it better than I did. But then there was this foggy ceiling that they experience when Evan and Claire leave Claire's apartment. I don't think I explained it very well in the chapter, but I was driving to work one day, and there was the weirdest fog driving down Interstate 30 between my house and work, where normal fog to me is the whole place is foggy, and from the ground to the sky, you're just in a cloud, and that's fine. Or you see fog rising off of a river, or you see a foggy area off to the side. But this was weird to me. This was, I'm driving down the highway, and everything in front of me and to the side is clear as day. There is no fog. However, the fog has fallen low enough that it is just under the street lamps. So it looked like you had this white ceiling driving down the highway. Everything below was clear, but then there was this kind of foggy white ceiling. And that's what I was kind of trying to describe in this. It's like the fog is pressing in, kind of like a ceiling. But anyway, so I share that with you. That's what you get with this show. Just random thoughts out of my brain. But I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode. If you have, please let other people know about it. when you share and comment and rate and all those things. The little robots inside the internet do what they do, and other people can find it. I would also enjoy if you went to Amazon and left a review there of any of my books that you have read. That would also be helpful. If you are not yet a part of the reader group for BrianThomasCrop.com, you can do that over at that very website. And for just the mere exchange of an email address, I will send you a 200-page PDF with several stories in there, including the entire first book of the Casey Jackson and South Acre series. And you can read that for your own enjoyment. But also, you will then be in the loop of all the things going on in the world of the books that I write. If there are... If you'd like to get a pre-advanced copy of the next book whenever that becomes available and give me some feedback on it, that's how you get to be a part of that. Find out what's going on in the fam, and then you also have a way to let me know how things are going with you. It'd be great to connect further that way. Also, and I haven't done an official ad for this yet because I just don't quite know how to do that. My alter ego, his name is Paul Christopher, and he has written, I guess, a doodle book. So if you like drawing but need help knowing what to draw or suggestions to spark your creativity, I, under this guy's name, have written a prompt book. It's got 500 suggestions. It ranges from things around Christmas and sports and musical things and underwater things and just all these different suggestions of things that you can write with space to do the drawing in. And you can find the link to that book in the show notes, and would enjoy it if you check that out as well. I think those are all the asks for this one, but for the most part, I'm just glad that you were here and that we got to share this time together. So thank you for that. And between now and the next time, I hope you have a good one. We'll see you later.